It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon, just another Wednesday, the kind of day you don't even remember a week later. But this was the day everything changed. A little girl sat alone at a suburban bus stop, swinging her feet, reading a comic book, waiting for her ride home like she always did. Nothing out of the ordinary, until a man showed up. A tall, well-dressed black man with a warm smile. He approached slowly, hand outstretched, saying her name softly like a song only they knew. But before she could even stand up to hug him, a white couple sitting nearby jumped to their feet. The woman clutched her phone like it was pepper spray. The man stepped in front of her like he was bracing for a fight. They didn't ask questions, didn't wonder why this man knew the little girl's name. They just saw what they wanted to see, and what they saw, in their mind, was danger. "Step away from the child," the woman snapped. The man's smile faltered. Confused, he glanced at the girl, who now looked just as confused as he was. He tried to explain, but they didn't want to hear it. The white man pointed a finger in his face and said, "We already called the police." And just like that, his world tilted. He looked down at his daughter, whose eyes were now wide with fear, not at him, but at the strangers yelling at her dad, and he realized it didn't matter that he'd raised her, that he braided her hair on weekends and helped her memorize her spelling words. To these people, he was guilty first, a threat first, a black man first. Not a father, not a human being. He reached out to comfort his daughter, but the white man blocked him again. "She said, 'Step back,'" the woman shouted louder this time. A neighbor across the street peeked through their curtains. A jogger slowed down to stare. Suddenly, he was the center of a scene he never asked to be in. And somewhere in the distance, faint at first, were the sounds of police sirens. He hadn't touched anyone, hadn't raised his voice, but now, in the eyes of half the block, he was already guilty. And that's when he knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every black father who dared to show up and still got treated like a suspect. He'd left work early that day, not because something was wrong, but because he wanted to do something right. He'd been traveling a lot lately, missing dinners, bedtime stories, even her soccer games. So when he wrapped up his meeting ahead of schedule, he didn't hesitate. He closed his laptop, grabbed his keys, and decided to surprise his daughter by picking her up from school himself. It was the kind of small gesture dads make all the time, but for him, it meant everything. The bus stop was only 5 blocks from their house. He parked a little ways down and walked over, smiling the whole way. He remembered how excited she got the last time he surprised her, how she dropped her backpack and ran into his arms like she hadn't seen him in years. He was hoping for that again, hoping she'd leap into his chest, bury her face in his coat, and giggle like she always did. He wasn't expecting an ambush, and definitely not from strangers. He replayed it in his mind, over and over. He'd greeted her calmly, used the nickname only she and her mom knew. She was smiling, right until that woman started yelling. At first, he thought they were trying to protect her from someone else. He even looked around like, did something happen here? But then the man got in his face. That's when it hit him. They think I'm the problem. And the pain didn't come from fear. It came from knowing this wasn't the first time. Just the first time it happened this loud. He thought about the times he walked through stores and got followed by security. The times he stood too close to a playground and got side-eyed by strangers. The times he waved at his daughter from the car window and some parent pulled their kid closer. He had learned how to stay calm, how to shrink himself, how to diffuse the tension before it exploded. But today, he didn't even get a chance. All he wanted was a moment, a hug, a hi daddy. Instead, he got accusations and stares. He got treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood. And the worst part? His daughter was watching the whole thing. Her little hands gripped the bench so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She didn't understand what was happening. But he knew, one day, she would. One day, she'd look back at this moment and realize what it meant. That no matter how successful he was, how kind, how careful. Some people would only ever see him as a threat. Not a father, not even a man. Just a black body in the wrong place. They didn't know his name, didn't know the girl's name, didn't know a single thing about either of them. But that didn't stop them from jumping in like they were heroes in some made-up movie playing in their heads. The white woman stood stiff, holding her phone like it was a badge. "We've called the authorities," she said, loud enough for the whole street to hear, like she wanted witnesses. Her voice had that smug edge, that tone that said, "I'm the good guy here." The man next to her, chest puffed out, jaw tight, like he was daring someone to prove him wrong. And the father, still calm, still trying. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I'm her." But before he could finish, the man cut him off. "I don't care what you think you are. You need to back away. Now." It wasn't concern. It wasn't caution. It was control. And it dripped with the kind of authority some people think they're just born with. The kind that gets handed to them by a world that always picks their side. The father glanced again at his daughter, her big brown eyes darting between them, searching for something to hold on to. He wanted to kneel down and reassure her, tell her everything was fine. But every time he moved an inch closer, the man would step in front of him like a bodyguard for a child he didn't even know. "Don't make this worse for yourself," the woman added, her thumb hovering over her phone screen like she was hoping she'd get to press record. That's when he realized they weren't protecting his daughter. They were performing, playing out a fantasy where they were the saviors and he was the predator. They didn't care about the truth. They just wanted to feel right. And they were willing to humiliate a child's father in public just to protect their fantasy. He'd been in uncomfortable situations before, sure. But this was different. Because now it wasn't just about how they saw him. It was about what they were teaching his daughter. That even in her safe place, even with her dad, someone could still treat her family like a threat. And no one around them said a word. People walked by. A car slowed down. A neighbor across the street pulled out a phone. Not to help, but to film. He stood there, heart pounding, breath tight, thinking, how many times has this happened to someone else? And no one believed them. This time, he knew he had to make sure it didn't get buried. Because the truth was standing right in front of them. They just didn't want to see it. At first, he tried to stay calm, to de-escalate, to reason, to keep his voice low, even though his heart was pounding like a drum. But the couple wasn't backing down. In fact, they were doubling down. "You're scaring her," the woman barked, taking a step closer, as if her presence was somehow safer than his. "We've seen this kind of thing before. Just step away." The man stood with his arms crossed, like a bouncer at a nightclub, blocking the father from even kneeling in front of his own child. And now, it wasn't just the two of them. A small crowd had started to gather. Parents, neighbors, people who didn't know what happened, but were already forming opinions. Because that's what happens, right? You see a black man surrounded by white people yelling, and your brain fills in the rest. You assume guilt. You assume threat. You assume whatever lie feels most familiar. He reached into his coat pocket slowly, not for anything threatening, just his wallet. He wanted to show them a photo of her. Something. Anything. But before he could pull it out, the man's eyes widened. "Don't you move," he shouted. The woman's finger hovered over her phone again. "He's reaching for something." Now people were really watching. A few backed away. Someone muttered, "Just let the police handle it." The father froze. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was turning into something dangerous. And through all of it, his daughter sat there, her little legs tucked up under her, her arms wrapped around her backpack like it could protect her. Her eyes were welling up now. Big, silent tears streaming down her face. She looked at him, confused, hurt, scared. Not because of him, because of them. Because the people yelling didn't make sense. Because the people around weren't helping. Because the world had flipped upside down in a matter of minutes. And then she said it, through shaky breath, through tears, loud enough for the whole block to hear, "Why are you yelling at my daddy?" Silence. Like someone hit pause on the whole scene. The man's mouth opened, then closed. The woman blinked like she hadn't heard right. But the little girl wasn't finished. "He's my dad. He came to get me. You're scaring me." The crowd shifted. A few gasps. A few people looked away, ashamed. Others still stared, unsure what to believe now that the story in their heads didn't line up with reality. And the father? He just stood there, hands still in the air, heart still racing. But now, there was something else rising inside him. Not fear, not shame, anger. The kind that comes from being humiliated in front of your own child, for loving her in public. There's something about the way a child speaks the truth. No filter, no hesitation, just pure, uncut reality. And in that moment, her voice carried more power than anything her father could have said. "He's my daddy," she repeated, this time louder, firmer, like she needed everyone to hear her. "You're being mean to my daddy." The couple froze. For the first time, they actually looked at the girl, like really looked at her. And the resemblance? It was obvious. Same smile, same deep brown eyes, same little dimple on the left cheek. She was his mirror, his proof, and somehow they had never even bothered to notice. The woman took a tiny step back, her phone lowered just slightly. The man opened his mouth, trying to recover. We just thought," but the girl cut him off. "You thought wrong." That's when the crowd shifted again. This time, the energy wasn't confused. It was tense, uncomfortable, the kind of silence that creeps in when people realize they just witnessed something ugly, something soaked in bias and too familiar to ignore. Someone whispered, "She said he's her father." Another person pulled out their phone. Another turned to leave, like they couldn't stomach watching anymore. The father stayed quiet, eyes locked on his daughter. He wanted to scoop her up, hold her close, shield her from the mess unfolding around them. But he also knew this was her moment. She was standing up for him, and that meant more than anything. The white woman looked around nervously now, like she was suddenly aware that this wasn't the heroic rescue story she'd imagined. She reached for her partner's arm. "Let's just go," she muttered. But he wouldn't budge. "Wait," he said, turning back to the father. "You should have said something." The father's eyebrows raised. "Said something?" he echoed. "You mean before you yelled at me? Before you blocked me from my own kid? Before you called the police?" He didn't raise his voice, didn't curse, didn't make a scene, but every word landed like a punch. "I didn't need to say anything," he continued. "She already did." The little girl took his hand, still trembling, but standing tall. And that's when it became clear. The couple hadn't just embarrassed themselves. They had exposed themselves. Exposed the ease with which they turned a joyful moment into a threat. Exposed the way bias hides behind concern, and racism hides behind just trying to help. Exposed the truth that for some people, the sight of a black man next to a child is suspicious, unless he's wearing a suit, holding a briefcase, or playing some stereotypical role they're comfortable with. And now, there was no hiding from it. The truth wasn't just spoken, it was seen. And it was a little girl who made everyone see it. The couple tried to slip away, but it was too late. The sirens had already echoed down the block. Blue and red lights danced across the sidewalk, and within seconds, 2 squad cars pulled up, fast and aggressive, like they were chasing down a criminal. Guns weren't drawn, but hands were near holsters. That kind of near that sends a clear message. One wrong move, and this turns into a headline. The officers jumped out, eyes locked on the father. Not on the couple, not on the crying child, on him. "Sir, step back from the girl," one of them ordered, voice sharp, hand already reaching toward his waist. "I am her father," he said, loud and clear this time. "Ask her." The other officer looked at the girl, who was now clutching her dad's hand like her life depended on it. Her tear-streaked face broke open as she shouted, "He's my daddy! He didn't do anything!" That should have been the end of it. But the first officer still didn't lower his guard. "Can I see some ID?" he asked. The father moved slowly, carefully, like he was handling explosives instead of a wallet. He pulled it out, showed them his driver's license, and pointed to the emergency contact card in his daughter's backpack that listed his name, address, and cell number. The officers stared for a moment too long, as if they were waiting to find something wrong. The woman from the couple stepped forward awkwardly. We thought the girl was in danger. We didn't know." And just like that, the police shifted. Their posture changed. Their tone softened. "Well, we're all just trying to keep the community safe," one officer said. No apology. No acknowledgement that they nearly escalated a peaceful moment into a tragedy. Just a shoulder shrug and a sideways glance, like this kind of thing just happens sometimes. But the father? He wasn't shrugging. Because what they called keeping the community safe looked a lot like endangering him in front of his own child. It wasn't just humiliating, it was traumatic. Not just for him, for his daughter. A little girl who now knew, in the most painful way possible, that her dad's love wasn't always seen as safe. That no matter how gentle he was, how loving, how legal, all it took was one stranger's assumption to put his life in danger. He didn't yell, he didn't fight, but in his silence, there was power. He stared at the officers, at the couple, at the neighbors peeking through their windows. And with every second that passed, the weight of their mistake grew heavier. And maybe, just maybe, someone in that crowd started to feel it too. She saw the lights from 3 blocks away. She'd been on her way home from running errands when her phone lit up with a text that simply said, "Please come now. It's happening again." No explanation, no time to ask questions. Just those 5 words from her husband, and that was enough. She pulled up fast, parked crooked, didn't even bother turning off the engine. And the second she stepped out, the air shifted. She was small, but her presence hit like thunder. Straight-backed, eyes blazing, voice loud enough to cut through the tension before anyone had a chance to breathe. Why is my husband standing here like he's a criminal? Heads turned. Even the officers looked startled, like they weren't used to being questioned that directly. She marched toward them, arms crossed, wedding ring glinting in the sun, fury radiating off her like heat. "My daughter is crying, my husband is humiliated. And all because these two thought a black man can't be a father?" The couple tried to speak, but she wasn't having it. "No, don't even open your mouths. You had no right. You don't know us. You didn't ask anything. You just assumed." The man in the couple looked at the ground. The woman turned red but said nothing. She pointed at the police. "And you, how many times are you going to show up with your hands near your weapons for us? You think we don't see the pattern? You think our daughter doesn't see it?" Her voice cracked slightly at that last part, and for a second, the anger gave way to something deeper. Heartbreak, exhaustion. I should be comforting my little girl right now, but instead, I'm explaining to her why people think her daddy is dangerous just for picking her up. The crowd, still gathered, still watching, had nothing to say, because there was nothing to say. She knelt down, wrapped her arms around her daughter, and whispered something only the two of them could hear. The girl melted into her chest, finally letting go of all the fear she'd been holding in. The wife stood back up and turned to the officers one last time. "If you're not going to charge anyone, then I suggest you go. Because this family, we're going home." And just like that, she took her husband's hand in one, and her daughter's in the other, and walked away, leaving behind a street full of silence, and a whole lot of people who'd just been forced to reckon with their assumptions. She wasn't just a wife, she was a storm. And in the middle of a situation meant to humiliate her family, she turned the tables, loud, unapologetic, and unforgettable. He didn't even know someone had been filming. Not until the next morning, when his phone started buzzing nonstop. Texts, missed calls, mentions on social media. Friends, coworkers, even distant relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, they were all sending the same thing. A shaky vertical video, 2.5 minutes long, posted by a teenage girl who'd been walking her dog down the block. The caption? This black dad was picking up his daughter. A white couple called the cops on him. Watch what happens. By lunchtime, it had 100,000 views. By dinner, over 1 million. By the next day, it was on national news. The whole world saw it. The confrontation, the yelling, the daughter's trembling voice, the mother's fiery arrival. No edits, no filters. Just raw footage of what it actually looks like when racism hides behind concern. Comment sections exploded. Some people were outraged, furious. How does this still happen? These people should be ashamed. I hope that little girl knows how brave she was. Others doubled down. Well, they were just trying to help. They didn't know he was the dad. This is what happens when you're too sensitive. But that only made the truth louder. Because this wasn't just about one father, one daughter, one ignorant couple. It was about a society that keeps putting suspicion before humanity, fear before facts, skin color before truth. Journalists called, activists reposted, think pieces were written. A popular talk show invited the family to speak. The wife declined. The husband didn't say much either. But the video? It kept spreading. Not because they chased the spotlight, but because their silence spoke louder than any soundbite. What made the moment viral wasn't just the injustice, it was the clarity. A dad picking up his kid, a couple jumping to conclusions, a child being forced to defend her parent from the world. It was simple and painful and real. And suddenly, a quiet bus stop in the suburbs became the center of a conversation no one could ignore anymore. You would think, after all that, the video, the headlines, the backlash, that the couple would have said something. An apology, a statement, even a half-hearted excuse. But they didn't. Not a word. The woman deleted her social media accounts within 48 hours. The man locked his profiles. A neighbor said they were embarrassed and just trying to stay out of the spotlight. But staying quiet after doing that much damage? That wasn't staying out of the spotlight. That was hiding. And the worst part? They still didn't think they did anything wrong. In fact, a local reporter tried to contact them for a follow-up piece. The only response? A short message from their lawyers saying they had acted out of reasonable concern for a minor and stand by their actions. No mention of race, no mention of bias, no acknowledgement that they treated a loving father like a criminal in front of his child. And yet, the internet kept dragging them. For days, their names trended online, blurred in screenshots, but not hard to find if you knew where to look. People found old posts, patterns, even comments they'd made in local community groups that hinted at the same kind of thinly veiled prejudice they'd shown at that bus stop. It was all out in the open now. But what hurt the family most wasn't the couple's silence. It was the realization that nothing would have changed if that video didn't exist. No one would have believed the father's story. The couple would have gone home, proud of themselves. The cops would have written a report, maybe even taken him in for questioning. And the daughter? She'd carry that confusion for the rest of her life. That was the most painful part. Knowing how close they came to becoming another story without proof, another headline buried in the algorithm, another black man accused, shamed, punished for being present. And still, no apology, no remorse. Just the cold comfort of, we were trying to help. But here's the thing. Intent doesn't erase impact, and silence doesn't undo harm. That couple thought staying quiet would make it all go away. But all it did was remind everyone watching that the people quickest to accuse are often the last to take responsibility. He never wanted to be a symbol, not for social justice, not for internet outrage, not for any movement really. He just wanted to be a dad. But after the video went viral, after the silence from the couple, after the quiet support from people who didn't know what else to say, he realized he didn't have the luxury of staying quiet. So he wrote a letter, not a tweet, not a thread, a letter, long, raw, and honest. He titled it, "To the People Who Couldn't See I Was Her Father." He published it through a local blog, but within hours, it was picked up by national media. Thousands shared it, millions read it. In it, he didn't rage, he didn't name names, he didn't even demand punishment. He just told the truth. He wrote about what it felt like to be treated like a threat in front of his daughter, about the fear in her eyes, about the strength in her voice, about how hard it is to raise a Black child in a world that still questions her safety when she's with her own family. He wrote, "I've worked my whole life to be a good man, a good father, a good example, but all it took was my skin in the wrong place for that to be erased." And then he wrote this, "To my daughter, I will never stop showing up for you. Even when the world sees danger, I'll still be your safe place, always." That line, it broke people. It wasn't just a father's promise. It was a challenge to everyone reading, to examine the stories they tell themselves, the assumptions they make, and the ways they participate in harm without even realizing it. The post turned into a talk at a local university, then an invitation to speak at a parent-teacher conference, then a feature on a national news segment about bias and fatherhood. But he didn't chase fame. He didn't monetize it. He just kept telling the truth. And slowly, people started listening. More fathers of color came forward. More stories were shared. Schools started hosting workshops on unconscious bias. A petition was started in his city to implement de-escalation training for emergency callers and community members. It passed. What started as a racist interruption at a bus stop became a movement for visibility, safety, and respect. Because in a world where Black fathers are too often erased, criminalized, or ignored, he stood his ground. And when his daughter spoke up for him, he made sure the world heard her. If this story hit you, even just a little, don't let it fade. Comment below. What would you have done if you saw this happening in real life? Share it. Talk about it. Let's keep the conversation going. Because silence is how it keeps happening. But stories are how we change it. Like, comment, subscribe. And if you've ever been underestimated, keep showing up anyway. You never know who you're inspiring just by being there.